Hello and Assalamu alaikum. Today we have with us Maulana Zain, an educator, a scholar, and an expert in Islamic finance. And there's a number of topics we're going to be speaking about with him today. Let's get right into it. So, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome, Maulana Saab. Glad to have you here. I've been wanting to do this for quite a long time. I know you're busy in Montreal, running your school there and doing quick trips back and forth from Toronto, so wasn't able to quite catch you until just now, and you have some holidays with the school, so I'm glad you were able to make it.
Salam, Jazakallah khairan. Alhamdulillah, it's nice to be here and excited to delve into some nice topics, inshallah, today.
Inshallah, looking forward to it. I know it's a quick break. It must feel nice to take a short breather before getting back into the busy school season. So how's it been taking a quick break?
Right, so this is probably one of the actual breaks I get to take during the year.
That's good.
Because the other breaks are just break from one work and then getting into something else at the same time. So when it's Eid break, then even other works kind of take a pause. So it's an easier time, and it's at the end of the academic year. So you're not essentially, you have time to plan for the next year, so you're more at ease. So this was a really good break where I was actually able to not touch my laptop for a few days.
Awesome, sounds good. So let's get into a bit of your background. I know I've known you for a number of years, alhamdulillah, and you've gone through quite a journey of education and learning, self-learning, going through the madrasa system as well as secular education, which is quite inspiring. So you've done kind of both avenues of study, which a lot of people will either stick to one or the other. So what kind of inspired you to take up that journey of education, especially after getting married? I think a bulk of your education was done after that point. So how has that journey been like, and what kind of got you into studies, Islamic ilm as well as secular education?
It's kind of interesting, and it's probably the first time that I get to speak about this in public. I do tell my students about it a lot of the times. My journey was very, I could say, it didn't come from okay, this is the plan and this is how I'm going to do it and I have this plan to do it. It just, I ended up being in certain places and being under the mentorship of excellent people who really saw certain things in me and kind of guided me towards certain directions. And once I was in those avenues and pursuing, those things, avenues kept opening up, and then until I would say probably 5 or 6 years ago was where I kind of decided, okay, this is my path and this is what I want to focus on. And once I did, then I kind of went full head on it. So when it comes to Islamic education, that's where you could say where the bulk of my last 15 years have gone. So I've always grown up in a fairly religious background. My father had a lot of love of the Quran and placed us in maktab from the early days, right? So, and this is talking about the times where makatib and evening classes weren't available everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So you had to travel 15-20 minutes from your house to get to those masajid that were offering these classes. So my father would finish work at 3-4 p.m. and he would have a quick bite to eat, and we would be on the road to get to those masjids. So my life started with that, and my older brother finished his hifz probably about 2006, and I was inspired to finish memorizing the Quran. I didn't memorize the Quran in that time. I was I had many things going on, and I was a kid, right? I was a kid growing up, and I had a lot of energy, and my brain was everywhere. So I didn't end up finishing my hifz at the time, and by the time I was finished high school, I had still not finished my hifz. I had still not done anything significant Islamically, in Islamic education wise.
Mm-hmm.
I did spend a lot of time in tabligh. I did spend a lot of time going in Jamaat. So I was always exposed to young scholars studying. All of my friends had gone to madrasas, etc., from their parents sending them to madrasa, etc. So I did finish high school. I did go to college. I didn't do so well in college, and because that was kind of something that I always wanted to do, I decided to leave college, and I started doing my the Hifz al-Quran at the age of 18, finished that, and then felt the need to get married, got married, and then continued on my path of knowledge. And interestingly, so at the time, the family situation was such that I couldn't travel outside to study. So most of my friends who did study had gone to South Africa, some had gone to India, some had studied locally in Ontario. But I couldn't, it was impossible for me to go. So I had to stay in Montreal. I had to make the best of what I could, find. So I had a very good teacher who I finished my hifz with, and he kind of suggested and said, why don't you just stick around? We'll figure out something, and once you get you figure out your arrangements to leave, you can study the initial books over here. You'll have more attention, and you can take it from there. So I jumped on that opportunity, and I excelled in that I was able to study one-on-one at some point. So the first 2 years was more of a class setting. I had 5 classmates, so 6 in total, and then that dwindled down to 4, 3, and then eventually I was alone. So then I still had intended to leave the city, but then some other ulama, other scholars had wanted me to stay, just to keep that environment of ilm and studying alive in the city. So one of my teachers two of my teachers taught me one-on-one, right? And that was excellent, because you really got to do the bulk of the work, in terms of reading and whatever research was required in those books, and at the same time, you got to ask whatever you wanted. So that was really good. Now, where did education come into all this? Where did university come into all this? So university came in a very random way, right? And as I mentioned just earlier, I didn't do so well in university. I actually got suspended, so most people don't know this, but I got suspended from college, and I had to, so I couldn't return unless I went through a year of night school, and then get my grades up and then get back into the day school. So I was, I had left with a sour taste, to say the least, right? So and I remember it was December 2010, and I had already intended to hop on the Islamic education journey, and I remember walking out of one of the buildings, and in the college that I was attending, it was, there was one main campus, a main building, and then there was a smaller building that was kind of for overflows of classes, etc. So my exam was in that extra building, and then you had to kind of walk outside to get to the main campus. So I remember just closing the door, and it was just the beginning of winter, and it was snowing, and I remember closing the door and telling myself, okay, well, that's the last exam I'll ever write. So I had put that behind me, and I didn't really want to get into it. But shortly after I got married, I attended 2 university graduations, and sometimes you just have it in you, and I felt like I was destined, or I needed to study something secular, and so I had this desire that I should go back to university. I should think about doing something. But I didn't know how. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. I definitely didn't want to put myself back in that environment of college and university. And one of the reasons why I got married early was to save myself from that environment. So, but
what program was that in college when you first started?
So when I first got accepted, I got accepted to this program called Explorations. So the Explorations program is like your pre-college program. So you have your health sciences designated for those students who wanted to get into medicine or engineering, etc. So then, so in high school you had to achieve certain percentages to get into high math, high sciences, etc. So I didn't get those grades in high school. So the Explorations program allowed you to do all of those prerequisite courses, so your math, science, physics, chemistries, etc., and then apply into your science program. So first semester I did decent, I did pretty good. Second semester is where things kind of, and I say this a lot. I say that the education system this is one of the reasons why I think high schools need to really have some, or there should be some sort of bridging between college and high school, especially for, here it's worse because you go from high school to university. So we kind of have an intermediate, which is high school, college, then university. But even then, right, it's like you go from missing a period and having a call to your dad's cell phone because you missed class, to the professor not really caring whether you're there or not. So, it was a challenge for me, and it was a big challenge, and I didn't do well at that challenge, and I think it's because of age. I think it was because of not having a motivation, and I do remember having a conversation with my parents probably a year before I applied to college, and saying that I don't really see myself going down this path, and I think what I really am interested in doing is finishing my hifz and then doing the alim course. That was kind of what I wanted to do. My parents were like, no, why don't you do it parallel? Do keep that your main, keep your college university as the main thing, and then you can do your hifz.
So what was that moment? Did you ever think of doing alim program when you were little, or you kind of came to that conclusion?
No, I did, and that was because the masjid I was at, there were some certain students who were doing the alim course, so I would see them and how they would study, and then and then you go in Jamaat, and if you go different cities, sometimes you visit students of knowledge. If you in Ramadan, sometimes people come and their mothers are students, so there was always that, and I always knew that there was this this concept of becoming an alim and coming back and to your community and serving your people. So so that was always something that I wanted to do. So then it took kind of not doing so well in college to kind of realize, okay, I've done what I needed to, and then it's not working for me, and I don't think it didn't work for the reasons I thought it didn't work. Right? I thought it didn't work because I didn't have the brains for it, or I thought because I'm not cut out for it. So that wasn't the reason. I think it was because I just didn't have a purpose.
Yes.
I think it was better for me to study with a purpose, so that I can actually do something, and not just just get into health sciences and then get into university and do a biochem and then get into medical school. That was kind of the trajectory which I was thinking, and of course that that wasn't, as a 17-year-old. I don't think I thought it through, and I don't think it was something that I wanted to do. So it ended up failing, and then I ended up on course, and I did extremely well when I left college. I ended up memorizing the Quran within 18 months. So it was I was on track, and I was working a full-time job as well. So it's not that I didn't have the brains to succeed in college, but it's just I didn't have a purpose behind it. So back to fast forward 2014, a year after I get married, and and I'm attending these graduations, and so I'm having these conversations, and my father-in-law runs a school as well, and and I remember we were at the courtyard of of the graduation, and I just nudged him, and I said, what if I do something in university? What do you think? And he's like, that's excellent. Why don't you think about it, right? And and that's what I, and and I know my in-laws and my wife is gonna watch this, so just a shout out to them, that they trusted, they really believed in me, right? And they never ever pushed me or forced me in another way. So, I got married to a pretty influential family in the community, and my wife had done her education. My wife had done Islamic education, and I had just begun my Islamic education. I had done no university, no college, really. They never really nudged me towards something, but they always wanted me to do it. So I just nudged my father-in-law and said, what do you think? And he said, yeah, it's a good idea. Why don't you look into it? And he said, if you don't have your high school, then you can do a GED, and you can get into university. So then I said, no, I have my high school diploma. So he said, why don't you apply as a mature student? So that was the first time that was proposed to me, right? So as a mature student, okay, what's that? So I started looking into different things, and I still didn't want to get into the actual university, so I was looking for an online option. So I found Athabasca, which was in Alberta, highly priced, and there was no funding available there was no funding available whatsoever. So I decided that with my financial situation right now, this is probably not the best option, so I let it go. Then, and again, I was adamant at the point that I don't want to step into university. If I do anything, it's going to be online. Waterloo, the same scenario was there, and so I put up for a pause for a year. Now that year, that I mentioned, I was doing my own course with a bunch of students. So it was a pilot program at that masjid, and there was everybody and anybody in that course, converts that were like had just taken a shahada like a few months ago, people who were just on the street and they wanted to get close to the deen. So everybody was in that course. Not necessarily everybody knew what that course was. I knew what it was, but not everyone else didn't know. So I was more advanced than a lot of the students that were there. So I wasted a lot of time, right? Because I had done a lot of the material before, so they had to learn that material. They weren't so serious. They would miss class, and I would get frustrated. So after a year finished, I went to the main teacher at the time, and I said, I don't think this is working out for me, and I really kind of want to leave Montreal, and I don't want to stay anymore because it doesn't make sense for me, like to be held back because of these students. So he didn't like the idea, and he was you should stay here, and he gave me a bunch of different reasons why I should stay. And he said, why don't you look into doing university at the same time? Like go to Concordia, local university. Just look into that. Maybe you can you could be busy, and so whatever's going on over here, you'll continue, and then you can do university as well. And subhanAllah, I applied, and me and my wife looked online, and Concordia University had a very easy process for mature students in independent studies, and I love that. I loved the flexibility. I loved the fact that I could take it at my pace. I could take a course at a time if I wanted to. If I could take 2 courses. It was easy. It was a very easy way of getting into university. I got into university, independent study. I selected, I think, the pathway, or my eventual pathway was supposed to be psychology. I thought, okay, it's interesting. So I got accepted. Did very well in the first year, and again it was, and I still didn't have a goal in mind, right? But after the first year ended, I decided, okay, you know what, maybe I should pursue medicine. So I started taking those classes, so those science classes, chemistry classes, biology classes, etc. And then where I had this shift was, so I had a teacher, and he was an excellent teacher, and he asked me, and he wasn't against university or anything of that sort. So he just asked me, he's like, it was my Alim course teacher, and he said, so what are you planning on doing? So I said, I've done really well in my math and science courses, and I really want to apply for a BSc and eventually maybe get to med school, inshallah. So he said to me in a very simple way, he said, why don't you try to choose a field that's not going to cause you to basically have to choose between one or the other, right? So being a doctor is a career, being an alim is a career. So at one point you're going to have to choose between one or the other, right? You're not going to be able to do both of them at the same time, and they don't really complement each other, right? So yeah, it's good to be an alim, it's good to be a doctor, and it has a it has a standing, but they don't really help each other, right? What you learn in an alim course doesn't really help you in medicine, and what you learn in medicine doesn't really help you in an alim course. And that's an excellent suggestion, and I gave it some thought, and I said, okay, that's really good, and eventually after conversations and after giving a lot of thought, I was actually teaching at the time, I was teaching maktab, and I was teaching Quran at the time, teaching Islamic studies at the time. So I said, why don't I get into education, right? Why don't I actually get into the field of education, being a certified teacher, and seeing how that kind of will shape my teaching and my thing, and I found the complement to be, within my first semester, I felt like this was from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this was they were both very complementary to one another, and that's it. And alhamdulillah, after that I was just focused on that, and I focused on doing both at the same time, and alhamdulillah I graduated from my B.Ed last May, and it's been an excellent post university degree life, I would say.
That's awesome. It's quite a journey of a lot of turns, and especially having gotten to that age and gone into college, back out, and then having to decide what you really want to do. A lot of people go through that same journey, but you finally found your way. I think that's important, and now I think you're kind of coasting along that path. But what were some of the challenges? I know you were married. You mentioned your wife also was with you along that journey of deciding how you're going to move ahead, and your father-in-law as well. But what were some of the challenges that you faced getting into that education, pursuing school, both in in the madrasa and also in university?
So I would say the biggest challenge is time, right? Now, time was a big challenge. So I didn't have any kids for the first 4 years of my studies, so that makes it a lot easier. Um, so and you're also working because you have to provide for a family. So it's a lot of balancing, right? It's a lot of balancing in terms of giving time to every single thing that you're doing. So university and education, the education program anywhere, Ontario, Quebec, is they're very competitive programs and have very high expectations of you, high kick-out rate as well, high dropout rate. So it's a demanding program. So time was for sure a big challenge, right? And you have being able to give everything its due time. So sometimes you lose on family time, sometimes you lose on on your sleep. Sometimes you get sick because you're just balancing everything. So and there's all that pressure. Not to mention, like, that's just your immediate family, but then you also have your parents, your siblings, and they want to meet up and they want to do things. And I think how I kind of got through it is taking everything a day at a time, a year at a time, and just taking it like that. So when I got into my education program, so this was in 2016. So I had done 2 years of independent studies, which was flexible. 2016 is a full-time program, and I'm in my third year of my own course, and I only have one more local year to do. So my last 2 years, I have to travel somewhere to finish. So I didn't, at that point, when I was applying to the education program, I didn't think to myself, or I didn't, I like most people would probably look at their own course and say, well, this is my priority, and it was my priority, right? I fully, would leave my university if I had to for my own course. That was my priority. But many people would look at that and say, well, how can you start a 4-year program or a 120 credit program when when you only have one more local year left? What are you going to do for the rest of the years or the rest of the credit? So
yeah.
I didn't look at it that way. I said, let's take it a year at a time, right? Like, let me do a full-time year, and let me see how it goes. If I have to shift things around later on, if I have to take it slower, and if I have to and subhanallah, and when you have these type of thoughts, sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, gets other people to say it. And I told my director this of the program when I graduated. I said on the first, and I of course, like, when I graduated, then my cohort, they were younger kids, and and I had spent 7 years in the program. They had finished in 3-4 years. So I went to my director and I said, I remember in my orientation 2016, you said, even if it takes 10 years for you to complete this program, it's okay. And I said at that point, I realized, okay, I'm in the right place. Okay, alhamdulillah, I can do this over 10 years. It's fine. And I ended up taking 7 years, not 10 years. But I said, that those words helped me get through and not feel bad that I'm taking this much time to get to my destination. So taking it a year at a time, taking a day at a time. We have bad days. We have very difficult days. Some weeks where when it's exam season, for example, right? And if you're somebody who cares about exams and your GPA, you're working really hard, and you don't want to do anything else. So of course those are difficult, right? And you have to cancel family events, you have to get people are upset, etc. But you got to take all of that, and it's part of the journey, and you accept it, and you move on, right? And it's you make up for it later on, and you don't dwell on that okay, I wasn't able to give time at that time, and you move on.
That's awesome. So and then you finally decided to go to South Africa.
Right.
What was that like?
So South Africa was, it's so all of us, I would say, any young Muslim growing up with an immigrant's background has heard of Ask Imam, right? It's your go-to question type of thing, right? So Ask Imam was always something I went to, and something about and Hazrat Mufti Zain Baig, who's excellent mentor of mine, and someone who I miss dearly on a daily basis, and the impact he had on my life. So he was a very, very calculated person. And what I mean is that he did everything, he had a purpose behind everything he did. So on his website, if you ever noticed, you'd have the student's name and you'd have the city. And there's different students mention different reasons as to why he would do that. So he didn't mention why, right? One of my theories of why he did that was, I think, to show the public the global impact that he has, right? So not only is he answering questions from all over the world, but he also has people from all over the world, right, answering these questions, and it kind of builds in you this type of, I would say, shauq, or this type of desire, to learn from him and then take back all that you've learned to impact your own society. So I think as I was studying, fiqh was something which I very, very much enjoyed. Usul al-fiqh and so fiqh, jurisprudence and principles of jurisprudence, etc. I really enjoyed it. So I very early on, I kind of wanted to be a mufti, right? I wanted to study more in that field. So, but then it was where are you going to study, right? So, Ask Imam or South Africa was the best option, because you would practice learning, writing fatwas in English, and you'd be serving in English. So that was kind of the best opportunity for me at the time. But because of life situations, that was just a desire, right? And it's very interesting how I actually ended up in South Africa. So So when I graduated my own course, up until that point, I think this was April 14th, 2019. So up until that point, I had intended to study IFTA, but I did not intend to do so in South Africa because of my health situation, family situation. I just decided to do it locally, and I had recommended one of my friends to actually go to South Africa. So long story short, 2 days after my graduation, in April 16th, and I'm just mentioning these dates because of how it's interesting how it develops. So on April 16th, I'm just on Ask Imam, and that was something that was very common for me to do. Just go on Ask Imam and just search up new things and see what's up and whatnot. And I had just seen on the announcement page something along the lines that admissions are full. And although I hadn't applied for an admission, I hadn't expressed any desire to go, but there was just something in my heart that just said that, wow, like that just stings.
You felt like you missed out.
Like I felt like I missed out, and I just remember, I was sitting in the kitchen, and my wife was in the bedroom, and I had, I just said to her, I said, what if we move? What if we go to South Africa for 2 years? And alhamdulillah, she was like, if you think we could do it, then let's do it. But here's the dilemma, right? Here's the biggest dilemma, right? So I have a whole house that I'm not a bachelor. I'm not living in a mother. I'm living in a house, so I have furniture. I have things. I have a lease and all these different things. And so if I have to leave, I have to decide to leave within the next 2 weeks. So by May 1st, everything has to be emptied. I have to give up my keys, and I have to apply for my visa, and all of these things have to kind of line up for me to go. And I don't even know if I'm going to get accepted.
So why is it 2 weeks at that point?
So why was it 2 weeks at the point? So it was 2 weeks at the point because my lease was ending in June. So I had to give my last month's notice if I had to go. Second thing is, part of where I was studying in Chatham, it was part of the kind of the program that the final year students had to spend the full month of Ramadan in I'tikaf. So and Ramadan was May 6th, I think. So I had to wrap everything up by May 1st. If I wanted to make it on time. So of course I could have delayed it, but I wanted to make it there on time. If I had to make it there on time, I had to wrap everything up by May 1st. So, and I still hadn't known if I got accepted or not. So alhamdulillah, I knew somebody who had gone there, and it was a bit easier, given the fact that I would live outside, because you don't have to account for someone boarding if someone is living outside, so they're just studying, and. So I asked him. I said, can you put a word in for me, because I just want to go now. So I think he got back to me 2 days later, and then a few days later I spoke to Mufti Ibrahim Desai, and and that was subhanallah, you speak, you got a concept of people, and and what you think of them, and you think, okay, this Mufti Ibrahim Desai is probably going to be this big and the admin actually said, oh no, Mufti Ibrahim Desai wants to speak to you, and I was like, oh man, this it's not going to go well, but you think it's going to be some big man, he's going to he's going to talk to you in a harsh way, whatnot, but he's very down to earth, and he gave me like his blessings, said, what, it's fine, make your arrangements, etc. So I got accepted, and now I had to get all the my visa papers, and South African visas are headache, right? From medical reports to police reports, just to get the documentation required to apply takes about 2 weeks, and then. And then, alhamdulillah, subhanallah, within those 10 days as well, we sold all our furniture. And on May 1st, believe it or not, we packed our U-Haul, and we left Chatham, and we went to South Africa. And
so what year is that?
This is 2019.
2019, yes.
2019, and this is my eldest right now. So she was just under 2 years old.
So this is just before COVID.
This is just before COVID, right?
So COVID was in full swing while you were there.
So yeah, exactly. So when we got there, right? When we got there, then we had really amazing 7 months that we were there, and then February hit, and I remember in February, there were talks about some COVID virus, and it spiraled so quickly. I just remember, one day we were sitting with my colleagues, and we were discussing our end of year barbecue that we would have, or end of year braai, as they say, not barbecue. And 2 days later, that infamous Trudeau, it's time to come home. Trump closes the borders in the U.S. and it's panic mode, and then being someone who's immunocompromised and dealing with a young child, and a lot of things go through your head that okay, if the borders are closed, and how long are you going to spend here, and what are you going to do, if you get COVID, medical system, and all these different ideas running through your mind, and same thing in that case. And then you also have a house, right? Because you moved your whole family there. So now what are you gonna do with that house? How are you gonna pay off your lease? And then if you leave, then and you have to come back, and all those questions in your mind. But alhamdulillah, I had a very excellent landlord, and he told me, what, just take your time. If you need to go back, I'll keep your stuff here. It's okay. You figure it out, and then made mashwara with Mufti Ibrahim Desai rahmatullah alayhi, and he said, I think it's better you just go back. Yeah, he said it's better, with your situation, it's better that you go back. And then I found a flight within 3 days, and I remember I was very heartbroken while leaving, thinking that I might not come back, and it's but alhamdulillah, I did go back, and I'm very happy that I went back and I got those last few months with my teacher. But at the time, that was a very stressful, and I think everybody was just confused, right?
Yeah.
From the airports to customs officers, everybody didn't know how to react, what to do. You're sitting in the plane, and they're like, okay, no one get off, or okay, only EU passports get off. No, everyone can get off now. Passengers with kids in this section, and then they're changing to another section afterwards. So it was a big mess, I think, and I think everyone was just freaking out, to be honest.
So you came back for a few months to Canada, or what was
So I was back in Canada from, I believe March till October, first week of October.
I see. Okay, and then you went back again.
Then I went back, yeah. So as soon as borders opened, and that was alhamdulillah. I still remember it was September, and so South Africa is not it doesn't have an economy like Canada. I mean, it depends on a lot of travel, exports, etc. The tourism industry is a huge part of their economy. So not having flights there was a huge problem for them in their economy, etc. So it was in the pipelines, and I think it was in September they had they had announced, and then I remember listening to that announcement and just hoping that the president would announce border openings, and I remember just jumping in the air when he said borders are going to be open, and then they published a list for low risk countries, and alhamdulillah Canada was on the low risk country, and so borders were open for 2 weeks for low risk countries, so they were going to renew it every 2 weeks. So from October 1st to October 14th, you had to. So those 2 weeks, whatever countries were on the list could get in.
You had to jump on it.
So I got in on October 14th, and on October 15th, Canada was off the list.
It was getting worse in Canada for sure.
It was getting worse in Canada at the time.
That's amazing. You made it in the nick of time. I mean, you mentioned health issues. So what's been your journey with health issues? I know you have you're immunocompromised. What can you delve into that a little bit?
Right. So I suffer from 2 autoimmune diseases, and so autoimmune diseases don't exist in vacuums. I mean, you have symptoms of them early on in your blood, etc. So there were, I think, some symptoms I had ignored, and eventually, based on different stresses of life and work, etc.
You mean early on?
So early, 2015, I would say, is when I started to face some symptoms, which I ignored or I just kind of put under the rug. And in 2017 March, and this was from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because I had planned to study abroad, and I had purchased my tickets. I had applied for the visas, and I'd got the visas, and I'd started to make my arrangements to get myself there, and I think a month after I booked my tickets is when I got my diagnosis, and after the diagnosis, the first question I asked the doctor was, can I travel to this country, and he said, I don't think it's wise for you to do so. And it's a new illness, and you don't know where it's going to take you, so it's better you just stay in Canada. So I weighed my options, and alhamdulillah, I felt that Chatham was the best option for me at the time, which is actually interesting because no one from Montreal had ever gone to Chatham. No one, and what I mean by that is that I had no precedent, that I could rely on. That going here is a good place, and I'd had contacts with graduates from the institution. I had seen various ulama who had graduated from the institution, like Sheikh Fayaz Tali, for example, Sheikh Ibrahim Madani, my teacher. So they were around, and they were reputable ulama and stuff. So and the principal, Hazrat Dr. Ismail Mehman Sahab, was the Khalifa, Hazrat Sheikh Rahmatullah Ali. So there was. It was a reputable madrasa, so it was a good idea for me to go, and actually it turned out to be excellent. And one of the reasons I say it was excellent was because it really helped me get out of my comfort zone, right? And in the sense that I had studied in Montreal, people knew me in Montreal, and then you kind of move everywhere, move everything, and you're in a city that nobody knows you, and you kind of have to build yourself up from scratch. So that was a good thing, but essentially, right? So the illness followed me to Chatham, and I had spent quite a few weeks, I would say, hospitalized in Chatham, in Montreal as well. A lot of time spent in treatment, and until I finally found something that would work, and that was, alhamdulillah, at the end of my first year in Chatham. So this is 2018 time, and alhamdulillah, it's worked since then. And it's obviously a challenge. It's always on your back, but you learn to live with it, and you learn to deal with the side effects, etc.
Now it's stable.
Alhamdulillah, now it's stable.
That's good. So, getting into finance, I know you've chosen Islamic finance as an area of focus in your studies, and have done a lot of work kind of in that field. What made you kind of choose Islamic finance as a career focused in your Islamic studies?
So there are a few different reasons. As I mentioned, I liked fiqh early on, right? And as an introduction, Islamic finance is a culmination. It's a newer field, but it's a culmination of different fields in Islamic studies, mainly being fiqh al-buyu' or fiqh al-mu'amalat, so the fiqh of transactions. So any student who studies fiqh Hanafi fiqh especially. So they'll study Nur al-Idah, or they'll study fiqh al-Muyassar, which is purely based on ibadat and worship. The second book that they study is Mukhtasar Quduri, and Mukhtasar Quduri is your second book of fiqh, and generally students start studying Quduri from the chapter of Buyu, right? So you can say one of your early on chapters of fiqh is Buyu, right? So
Buyu meaning?
Buyu means transactions.
Okay.
So buying, selling, etc. So I had studied that well, and as I'd mentioned earlier on, I was studying one-on-one, right? So I had a teacher, and I would study one-on-one with them. So that helped develop interest in the topic, and Allah bless like the teacher who taught me, Maulana Jamil, who mashallah, who has done a lot for me, and now we run the Darul together. So he taught me fiqh al-buyu, right? And he taught me very well, alhamdulillah, and I developed that interest. Then I went to Chatham, and in Chatham there was a good focus on that as well. So one of my teachers who taught us Abu Dawood and Mishkat, he would delve into a lot of these topics, and I would say one person who really pushed me to kind of get that interest and kind of get my feet wet into the field was our Bukhari Sharif teacher, Abdul Musab. So he finished from Durham, Karachi, and Durham, Karachi is, you could say, the hub of Islamic finance. One of the hub of Islamic finance in the world, education wise. A lot of the scholars who are in the field right now have connection to that institute. So he would teach us, Buyu, right, that chapter. And he would go on, and he would always say, none of our students have gone into this field, and you guys just waste your time doing different things, and no one focuses themselves in this field, and it's an important field, and we need it. So I was, okay, I had gotten that message that, okay, this is something which is important. Now, studying under Mufti Ibrahim Desai was instrumental, right? And that, Islamic finance was part of his curriculum. So in the first year and in the second year. So he would teach Islamic finance, right, as a subject to the students in the first year and in the second year. A lot of the questions you received on Ask Imam were finance-related questions. So the first practical exposure that I got to Islamic finance was under Mufti Ibrahim Desai rahmatullahi alayhi. First contract reading, right, and going through contracts and ensuring Islamic Sharia compliancy was under Mufti Ibrahim Desai rahmatullahi alayhi, right? So and subhanallah, right, and this is, Islamic finance is a field where it's very difficult to make it anywhere or to get anywhere without having a mentor, right? Without having somebody to guide you, and that's something that I can never repay, and that they really guided me in building contacts, etc., and where to essentially focus my energies so that I could advance in a proper way.
So you'd say Mufti Ibrahim Desai was a quite an important influence in choosing this field to focus on?
I would say yes, of course. I think he throughout in my last few months of being in South Africa, I do remember he would constantly tell me that you should advance in this field, and you would tell me make your connections and do what you can to get into the field, and reason being that there aren't many ulama in the field, and many ulama who have studied traditionally and have also and he knew I was doing my master's as well in Islamic finance. So he would push me to get things done, and even certain opportunities that would arise, he would recommend me for those opportunities. I remember there was one international magazine that had approached him to write an article, and then he said, I want you to write it I want you to write it instead. So he would really kind of push us forward in getting us to do things. And then like one of my first major projects that I worked on was Manzil, right? And that was through Ask Imam, that was through Mufti Ibrahim Desai rahmatullahi alayhi.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. So, what do you think about the halal finance industry in Canada? I know you've worked with a number of industry partners. You mentioned Munzil as well. So, where do you see that going? What's the vision?
Right. So the so Canada is extremely behind, right? And
Yeah.
that was actually my my project paper for my master's. It was on that topic exactly, which is I mean, not exactly that, but how the government's role in trying to assist Islamic finance in Canada, and that's crucial because um, Canadian banking conventionally is very conservative, and doesn't really allow room for things which are, you know, outside of the realm of what you would describe as conventional banking, which makes it difficult because most of Islamic finance is based on being asset backed and based on real ownership, based on equity, and as anyone would know, equity, assets, and all these different things leads to one thing, which is taxes, and taxes are very difficult, especially if you have these products that you want to launch and develop, and it makes it costly. So that's been something which is extremely difficult for anyone who's wanted to launch anything in the field. So I would say that um, beyond that as well, Canada also had an instance that took place in 2008 during the financial crisis with UM Financial, and UM Financial actually was it was a break, right? It was something which was getting a proper halal channel of funding to an Islamic financial organization in an Islamic way. So it wasn't interest based; it was actually investment based, and they had an investment agreement with that credit union. And it was a breakthrough, right? So to be able to offer Islamic programs through that avenue, but then when it crashed and it had the whole case, etc., then it left a sour taste, and a sour taste in the mouths of regulators, left a sour taste in the mouths of funders, etc. So, and as some of my colleagues or some of the people I've worked in would say, that it's always an elephant in the room, right? That conversation with anybody is an elephant in the room. That is your and even in the Muslims consumers, right? You go to any person and you say this is Islamic finance product, and the first question you're going to be asked is, what's going to happen if you become bankrupt? What's going to happen to my mortgage, right? So it's like something which is engraved in the minds of people. But I would say, alhamdulillah, there are a few courageous people, right? And I, Munzil is a company that, mashallah, they've worked really hard. Iqraz is another company that's worked really hard, and I've worked with both of the CEOs very closely. So Muhammad Sawaf and Saeed Zuhair Naqvi, I've worked with them. I know, and I mean, like, these review processes that I've done, they're not Sharia board reviews, right? So one is that an organization hires a Sharia board, and a Sharia board is paid by this organization to ensure that the product is Sharia compliant. They issue a fatwa, and they're obviously independent, but they're a Sharia board, and they're hired by the organization to issue a fatwa. So when we reviewed Munzil from Askimam, so Dar al-Ifta Mahmoudiyya issued a fatwa for Munzil for the Murabaha and the Musharaka, and the organization that I co-founded, Siri, issued a fatwa for Iqraz. So these were external PR, reviews, right? And to understand what that means is that they've accepted that at the end of this review, we can very well write a fatwa saying that this product is not Sharia compliant, and now it's out in the open, right? So it's a risk, right? And I would say one thing that I found is that both of these individuals were extremely open, in the sense that they whatever documentation you wanted from them, whatever changes you requested from them, whatever you needed, to be satisfied for their product, they were ready to do so, and that's what makes them, I would say, like leaders and pioneers of Islamic finance right now. And one thing about them as well is that their mindset is that it doesn't matter if it's going to take us 5, 10, 15, 20 years to scale, but in the process, we're not going to do anything which is going to be non-Sharia compliant, right? So you have other players in the industry that don't have that mindset. So their mindset is, okay, riba is haram, it's 100% haram, it's bad, and our products are, okay, not the ideal. So they'll agree that their products are not ideal, they're not 100%, they're not Sharia compliant, but it's better than the bank. So let's just work with this for a couple of years, and maybe inshallah we'll have the opportunity to build the confidence with our partners or people that we're working with, and eventually we'll be able to do the ideal. So they'll work with the non-ideal until they get to the ideal. Whereas these other companies, they'll take their time working with the non-ideal, working with the ideal, sorry, and they'll make sure that whatever they're doing is always in line with what Sharia dictates.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I know I had a conversation with Dr. Sawaf. He said they spent a number of years in kind of the R&D phase before they even launched anything, figuring out everything. And I think that was important for them to do that. There was quite a bit of struggle. It was an interesting conversation.
Right, and mashallah, Dr. Sawaf, alhamdulillah, like I know him for many years now, and he's someone who's very, very mukhlis, alhamdulillah, and I've seen Manzil grow from their first client till now, right? And and mashallah, it's something. It's a testament of the statement, slow and steady wins the race, and both these corporations, mashallah, are doing excellent in the field, and they're funding many mortgages, and they're IOFI compliant, and they do whatever they can to ensure that the community is satisfied with their products.
So I wanted to kind of take a quick moment to explain, if you can, in as short words as possible, what is the difference between a conventional mortgage and an Islamic Sharia compliant mortgage? I know there's a number of models. There's ijara, there's murabaha, and musharaka. So what is, if you can explain what is haram about the conventional mortgage system that uses, interest, riba, and then going into Islamic mortgage. A lot of people will say, you're basically paying the same thing. You're paying a profit rate. I've even seen these discussions on the internet where, there's Islamic banking, but basically their rates or profit rates are the same, 5, 6, 7, 8%, and the person pays the same amount every month. And you basically it's a loophole around trying to get to, the same thing. So what makes it one haram, one halal, and what's really the difference?
Right. So I'd like to give an example, and I say that if I was to come to you and I was to put 2 chicken burgers on the table, and I was to ask you, Nabil, which one of these burgers is haram and which one of them is halal, right? Just tell me, just by looking at the burgers, which one is halal and haram. You wouldn't be able to tell, right? Just by looking at it, right? Same way, if I had to bring 2 pictures, and I would say, this is a man and a woman, there's a man and a woman, one of them is married, one of them is not. One couple is married, one couple is not. Which one is the married one, which one is not? Just by looking at the pictures, you wouldn't be able to tell. So the difference between halal and haram isn't always as apparent as just looking at it and saying it's halal or haram, right? So yes, in terms of payments and processes, etc., they're extremely similar, right? And it's not a secret that that the Islamic finance industry at the moment, and Mufti Zain Baig talks about this in his Intro to Islamic Finance, is the stage that the Islamic finance model around the world is to mimic a debt-based system using a trade-based system, right? To mimic a debt-based system using a trade-based system. So what we know, or how we do our accounting, or how we do our funding, etc., is all based on a debt-based system. So we know that debt is what leads to riba, right? So what riba is excess which is stipulated in a contract of debt, and doesn't have an exchange, right? So someone loans you $100 and they're expecting 150, so that $50 is considered riba. It's considered usury interest because there's no exchange for that 100. Whereas a debt-based system is based on a trade-based system is based on real trade, right? So now the question is, and this is goes back even to the time of Wahy, the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, says in the Quran that riba is haram, right? The riba is not permissible. So now what's the reaction of the kuffar, right? The reaction of the kuffar is innamal bay'u mithlu riba, right? So why are you saying that riba is haram, right? Bay', trading and transacting and sale is the same as riba, right? I give you $100 and you give me $150 back. That $50 is my profit. You sell me $100. You sell me a phone which is worth $100, and you sell it to me for $150. That $50 is a profit. So profit here, profit here. You call it profit here, I call it riba here. What's the difference? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And this is and they say in Urdu, hakimana jawab, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in a very, very, like, in a way which is not going into any logic, not going into not like refuting any of their thoughts. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just clearly says, halallahu al-bay'u haram al-riba. Allah has made trade halal, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made riba haram. So what is the difference between riba and trade, right? So one of the main differences is the aspect of risk, right? And risk is intrinsic in trade, but it's not intrinsic in a debt. And there is risk, of course, there is risk, but the risk is different. So when somebody engages in trade with somebody, it's a trade of risks, right? So I have $100 in my pocket, you have a $100 phone in your pocket. Before we transact, you have all the risk related to that phone. If it falls before our transaction, well, too bad, right? It's your phone, it's your risk. And same thing with my money, right? It's my risk. If somebody steals it from me, it's not your responsibility. So now when we trade, we're trading the risks associated to that item, right? So to whatever I'm giving, the counter exchange. And that's not the case with a loan, right? It's not a trade of risk, it's a transfer risk. So that $100 is sitting in my pocket, and I'm loaning it to you, right? Now, right in front of me, if somebody was to come and steal the 100 from you, now that $100 which you owe me, I'm sorry, Nabil, it got stolen from you, but you still owe me $100, right? Mm-hmm. So I've just transferred that risk to you, and it's not that I've forgone it and I've said, you know what, I'm not going to get it back anymore. Whereas, so there's a transfer of risk that takes place between the borrower and the creditor. And now some arguments that people might make is, okay, there is creditor risk, right? There's a risk that you're not going to pay me back. Well, that is true, but most of the time you're not going to lend to anybody. You're not going to lend to any, Zayd Amr Bakr, right? You're only going to lend to somebody that you trust is going to pay you back. So the expectation is to get paid back. There is a possibility that you won't get paid back, but that's just a possibility. The expectation is for you to get paid back. So the risk is there, and that's why Sharia doesn't say that you have to leave that risk open. You can mitigate that risk. So how do you mitigate that risk? You can mitigate that risk through a guarantor. You can mitigate that risk through a mortgage, through a rahan, as we say in Arabic. So you can mitigate it, but you can't profit off of it, right? And another thing is that a loan is something which is voluntary, right? So you voluntarily understand that the money that you're going to give today is not going to have the same buying power that it's going to have. The same buying power you have today won't be the same 5 years from now, for example. So it's something that you voluntarily accept while you're lending that money. So when it's a voluntary act, it goes against the principle of being a voluntary act if you're expecting a profit off of it, right? So I call somebody or so you call me to come and volunteer at the masjid to pick up leaves, for example, and then at the end of the day I'm saying, I work 5 hours, give you my wage. Well, I mean, it doesn't work that way. It's either voluntary act or it's something which is paid. So nonetheless, the main aspect between, or the main thing which distinguishes between riba and trade is the aspect of risk, whereas there's a risk which takes place. So all of the financial transactions that we have, whether it's ijara, musharaka, murabaha, risk is intrinsic in them, right? So there's risks which are taking place. Now the risks are different. So not every transaction shar'an does a person have to assume the same amount of risk, right? So if I own a house with you, it's not the same as if I rent a house from you, right? So if I share a house with you, then we're both responsible for the structure of the house, etc. If something happens, then we're both responsible. But if I'm renting the house from you, I'm not responsible for the structure. I'm just responsible to pay the rent. So I don't have to accept every single, and this is a common objection, you'll just take the word risk and you'll say, well, there's no risk here, there's no risk here. Well, you're not obligated to assume every single risk in the world. You're obligated to assume a specific risk which is related to the actual product, right? So whether it's a murabaha, whether it's a musharaka, all of the financial institutions assume risk. So risk which is related to the property itself, risk related to ownership. And I'll tell you an interesting story, actually. While we were in South Africa, and this is something that would happen while I was there. So this was a bank that Mufti Zain Baig was overseeing. So they were engaging in murabaha, and murabaha is, in simple words, it's a sale that takes place in which the bank first makes the purchase and then they sell it to the end user at a profit, a disclosed profit. Now the condition for this transaction to be permissible is that in the interim, right? So between the sale of the bank from the supplier or let's say the third party to the client, in that interim, the bank has to assume all risks associated to that item. So, so one company had.
So that one moment there. So what that means, if in that interim, if the buyer walks away, the bank has the house, and they have to deal with it. Is that what it means?
Not necessarily, because you could have one-sided promises in Sharia, right? So what generally how that's mitigated generally is. The bank is not obligated to sell, right? The bank can say, I don't want to sell it to you, but the client is. So it's a one-sided promise, not a two-sided promise. So a two-sided promises are prohibited, one-sided promises are not prohibited. So of course the bank is engaging in all this because of the client. So they have to securitize their interest in a certain way. So it's a one-sided promise. So the client is obligated to purchase, but the bank doesn't necessarily have to sell it to the client. So but what it really is that if anything happens to the house or the item, right, and it gets destroyed, the bank has absolutely no recourse to the client, right? That's conditional. So back to the scenario in South Africa. So this bank had purchased on behalf of the client $2 million or $1 million worth of cotton, right? Because it's for a company that was dealing cotton. At night, before the delivery of the cotton to the client, there was a fire in the warehouse.
Oh no!
and $1 million worth of cotton was basically burned off. So the bank did assume that risk, and the bank did have to take that loss. But you see now, one thing now is that on one perspective, a lot of clients would look at the murabaha structure, and they would say, well, the bank is guaranteeing their rate for 25 years, right? Because in a murabaha, in this type of transaction, the price can't change. So whatever is fixed today, it has to stay for 25 years. But look at the perspective of the bank. So if they had offered a rate, for example, right when the rates were crazy low, like 2%, 3%. Now when the rates are going up to 7%, 8%, 9%, they can't change that rate, right? So that's also a risk, and that's the aspect. That's that's the point of trade, right? So the rate could go high, the rate could go low, so it could go in either party's favor. But the bank is not obliged, shar'an, right? They're not obliged according to Sharia to take that risk and say, you know what, the price is not going to be fixed, and we can just do whatever. So they're allowed to set a price and expect a certain return for that risk that they're taking. In a musharaka, it's a bit of a longer relationship. So there's a co-ownership that takes place, and in that co-ownership, whatever structural damages or things which are related to natural disasters, etc. So the corporations are obligated to share in that loss. So it's not all the same thing, right? It does seem that way because we end up being in a similar payment scenarios. But again, the reason for that is because we're trying to we are mimicking essentially a trade-based system in a debt-based system, and the goal is inshallah to eventually move away from that and be able to offer these products without all of that.
That's an interesting point that you said there. I was kind of thinking as well that, well, how would it work in an ideal Islamic economic model? You said you would move away. What would that look like, maybe briefly?
It's an interesting question. I personally don't know exactly how that would work, but I could say that you'd have more. Like for example, right now the way it looks like is 5% rates, and rates are much higher, and the time frame is much higher, much longer, and these loans are loaned for much longer, and they kind of trap you in debt for all these years. So even though you're not technically in debt, right? In the musharaka, you're not in debt, right? So because you're in a co-ownership and you're just paying your house throughout these years, but you're in debt for all these years. You're not in debt, but you're in obligation for all these years. I would say in an ideal scenario, right, you would have Muslims who would take their profit, right? And I think this happens more on a private level nowadays, right?
Yeah.
So people that would loan you a good sum of money for a number of years, and they'll take part of your they'll take part of your ownership. But they'll take a profit which is reasonable to them, not as much as what we have right now, and I think there's more solidarity, right, within the Muslims at that point.
I think the biggest difference would be in an Islamic economic model, there would be zero inflation in currency. So that means that over a period of time, like 25, 30, 50, 100, 75 years, whatever it is, the prices of your income versus the assets like houses does not become massively different. So the disparity between incomes and the price of real estate, let's say in the early 20th century, and what it is today 100 years later, is very big. You could just in the 1920s, for example, you could buy a house for like $10,000, something like that, maybe even less. But and then people were making maybe $1,000 for the entire year in terms of salary, so it was like 10x salary. But now it's not like that at all, and the affordability is getting much and much less. And as currency inflates, it's all based on interest. And then if you don't have interest, then even a tiny bit of profit is enough. But right now, if you keep only a minimum profit, the inflation will basically eat up. So you have to have a very high profit, and it takes much longer to pay it back. But that's an interesting point, and
I'll follow up to that point. There's an economist by the name of Richard Wolff, and he actually criticizes the capitalist system, and he talks about how wages up until the 80s, or I remember exactly what he says, 80s or 60s. He says wages were very closely tied to economic activity, right? So as economic activity was increasing, wages were also increasing, until we came to the era of the industrialism, etc., where you had a huge disparity between economic activity and wages. So you had a lot of economic activity, You had a lot of income being generated from corporations and industries, but those wages weren't moving with that at the scale of the increase of economic activity. So then he says that. So what happens is these corporations that are hiring these employees at a lower wage, they need to put their money somewhere, right? So they're getting richer and richer and richer, and the ones that are at the bottom are getting more and more poor, and things are getting more expensive at the same time. So the people who are at the top, these monopolies, etc., they have a lot of money. So where are they going to put their money? So they're going to put the money into the banks, right? They're going to put the money into the banks, and the banks are going to lend their money, and they're going to lend their monies to who? They're going to lend their money to the average worker, right? So the average worker now is going to take a loan to meet his basic necessities. So take a credit card to pay his groceries, take a loan to buy a house, take a loan to get a car, etc. And the interest is going to be paid to the bank, and the bank's going to pay part of that interest to those corporations. So it's an eventual cycle of just making the rich richer and making the poor even more poor. So the poor are just surviving and taking these loans to meet their basic necessities, whereas those that are at the top are just getting more and more rich.
Yeah, exactly. Making more money than they know what to do with. So there's another part of, I guess, the Islamic financing model, which is insurance. And I don't think any of the companies that exist today really tackle that. And I think insurance it's an important part of a lot of people's lives in terms of owning a vehicle, even owning a home. So there's automobile insurance, there's home insurance, there's also life insurance, but I think you can maybe touch on it, and that's not really halal. But what does that look like? Is there any solutions that are coming up in regards to insurance?
So the insurance industry, so the Islamic insurance industry, which is takaful essentially, relatively in the world, it's a pretty it hasn't advanced as fast as the Islamic banking industry, right? So Islamic banking industry, even in smaller markets, you'll find prominence. So in the Middle East, South Africa, England, Tashkent area, etc. So the takaful industry itself hasn't advanced so much. You do have a prominence of takaful in Malaysia. Mm-hmm. Malaysia is the most developed, I would say, one of the most developed industries, and part of that is because they're backed by the state bank in Malaysia. So I have sat in a few discussions with different people in Canada in regards to developing takafuls, etc. I think it is something which is important, but it requires, I think, there's a lot of technicalities behind a takaful model, and actually, it's not as straightforward even in a jurisprudence perspective as financing is, right? Because it derives itself from a concept which is prohibited, which is insurance, right? Insurance is prohibited because it's an amount that you pay for an event which is uncertain in the future, and it's based on cash, so you'll get a payment. You might get a payment later on, etc., based on an event. So the origin itself is already questionable. So the takaful industry is a slower industry to develop, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that a lot of scholars are not really comfortable with the concept of takaful, first of all. Mm-hmm. Secondly, those that are comfortable with it, it has a lot of implications. It's a lot more difficult to kind of to set up, especially with the capital requirements for a takaful. But it is something which is in the pipelines, I would say. Maybe not in the next 5 years, but potentially after that.
Are any of these Islamic finance? I know they're focusing on mortgages for homes. But how about vehicles? Because a lot of 0% financing doesn't really exist anymore, especially in today's market. There used to be a lot of automobile manufacturers that used to offer 0% finance. I got my first car a Hyundai Elantra on 0%, 6 years finance, and it was just straight 0% in terms of my agreement. And on paper, it was actually through Scotiabank, but whatever I signed, all the documentation was all 0%. But that basically doesn't exist anymore because of the current economic kind of environment. But if the current companies can offer automobile financing products, and the amounts are smaller, so maybe they can even get into that more easily. There's a lot more people that are buying cars. Is that possible at all? Is there any discussion of that happening?
So there are a lot of discussions on that, and corporations that are trying to. I think what it is that the need for home financing is so vast that it's like, they're trying to put every single dollar that they can in trying to meet that need.
Yeah.
And I think as soon as we're able to solve that capital issue, then I think that there's not just car financing, right? I mean, business financing, student loans. So these are all really important, projects. So in the U.S., one of the banks that I'm part of, that I'm a board member of, Stearns Bank. So they're not focused on residential financing. They're more focused on commercial financing, focused on equipment financing, etc. So that to tap into a market which is completely untapped, right? So you do have residential financing, which is pretty common in the U.S., but commercial financing for people that want to build their companies, etc. That's not there. So that is a corporation that's kind of stepping into that. But I would say in Canada, like I've been in discussions again regarding car financing, but I think at the moment it's more a question of trying to meet that huge demand of residential financing.
That makes sense. When I was speaking with Dr. Sawaf, he said they would need, I think, something like they would need $10 billion in order for them to fully finance their entire waiting list for just home mortgages. And I think he said his list is growing at about $100 million a month. And it's just, the need is there, but getting that financing is just impossible. Where do you think the solution will lie? Would it really be that we're going to have kind of the Canadian government and the central bank getting in here and offering an opportunity for Islamic banks, to borrow money from them with a different model? And is that possible at all?
I think what is sustainable, I would say, is, I mean, like right now, a lot of these corporations that are doing halal financing, so they have investment agreements with their institutional investors, etc. So what would help would be that if these big banks were also investing into these corporations and providing a channel of funding, or if the corporations themselves, right? So these banks themselves had worked to develop, and this is actually one of the reasons why I went to South Africa was because the Muslim community is so developed, right? It's a third world country, but its Muslims are developed, and what I mean by being developed is like they're developed at the highest level, right? And at the highest level of orthodoxy. So their halal industry, for example, you could pick up any chip packet or any chocolate packet, and you'd have a Sanha stamp on it, right? And Sanha is like, you could say your equivalent of HMA in Canada. So at the highest level, right? So even their banks locally, all of their national banks, all of their banks have Islamic finance windows, Islamic banking windows, where they're able to provide these facilities to their clients. So I think that is the future, is that inshallah, these banks would work with the Muslim communities to develop Islamic banking divisions within their banks. And actually the bank which I consult, which is Stearns Bank, it's a smaller bank, it's a national charter bank, so they do have abilities to lend all across the US. But they're a national bank, and they've actually taken initiative to develop an Islamic banking division within their bank. And if our national banks in Canada were to do that, then that would definitely solve a lot of the issues that we're facing today.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds good because, and especially if somebody's building a factory and they need massive machines, and some of those machines can be millions of dollars, I think that kind of solution would definitely come into play. So, a lot of people do. I wanted to ask this quickly. We get a lot of requests, and a lot of people are confused about this. Automobile leasing. So, leasing. A lot of people lease cars, especially if they can't finance them and they can't buy them out cash. Cars are expensive, so just go and lease them for 4, 5, 6 years. You just pay a monthly, and then at the end of the lease period, just give it back. But there's an interest that's attached to it. Or at least they use the word interest. Is that really interest Islamically, or is that's not the case?
Right. So that's an interesting. I mean, that's a good thing. That point that you mentioned is that is it interest Islamically? Because interest is an English word, right? So riba is a term. It's just a term, and it has certain requirements for it to fall under riba. And interest is what generally translated riba as interest, but interest doesn't equal riba, and riba doesn't equal interest. So what I mean by that is that you could call it something else, but if that's what actually is at play, it's riba, right? So
that's right.
So if I'm lending you $100 and you say, okay, give me $100 and then throw in a chocolate bar, right? So that chocolate bar is a gift or whatever you want to call it, but in the eyes of Sharia, that's riba. Right, so you don't have to technically call it riba for it to be riba, and the vice versa as well. So even if it's called interest, if it doesn't play out to be interest, it's not. It doesn't play out to be riba. It's not riba. So as you mentioned earlier, riba is wherein there's a contract of exchange, a contract of debt, and where an excess is stipulated in that contract. Right, so it's a contract of debt. So what happens in a lease? So you go to the dealer and you want to lease out a car. So you can't finance it, you can't pay it out front, and you don't want to, go into ownership. You just want to drive it and then give it back after a few years. So they'll have an agreement with their with whoever finances their cars. So let's say, for example, Scotiabank, right? Scotiabank is their funder. So now, if you want to lease a car, Scotiabank is going to purchase the car, right? So even the registration documents are going to have Scotiabank's name on it. Insurance documents are going to have Scotiabank's name on it. So Scotiabank is going to be the owner of the car, and they are going to lease the car. They're going to rent out the car to you. Now, in determining how much you need to pay in their lease, they are going to use factors of borrowing such as the interest rate. But does that mean it's riba? No, because you're not borrowing any money from them, right?
That's right.
You're just using their car, and at the end you're paying a flat amount, and interest can be included in that, right? So it's similar to, if your landlord purchases house on a mortgage, and he rents out that mortgage to you, and he tells you, listen, my mortgage payment is $1,000, for example, and I'm going to charge you, $1,100. So he's telling you exactly how much he's paying on his mortgage, and he's telling you that he's going to add this much to you. So are you paying for his interest, or are you paying interest? You're not paying interest because your transaction or your dealing with him is the use of the property. So the same way, your transaction with Scotiabank in this case is for the use of the vehicle, and you have a flat amount at the end of the month.
Actually, usually for leases, you're actually just dealing directly with the vehicle manufacturer's financing arm.
Right.
So for financing, usually I'll go to a bank for most of the car manufacturers. But if I'm leasing, let's say I'm leasing from Toyota, so my monthly lease, if I see on my bank account, it'll show Toyota, financing or Toyota leasing, exactly, or something like that. So most of the time, the leasing is going through their financing arm.
No, so for example, I've seen for Mazda,
okay,
that their cars are owned by Scotiabank.
Okay, I see. In the back, I see. I understand. So home affordability is a huge crisis for a lot of young families in Canada, especially. It's been an increasing challenge and a struggle for a lot of people, and kind of doubly so for Muslim families that are trying to avoid going to the bank. So home ownership becomes even more challenging. there just aren't that many options, and especially to get a mortgage through, say, Mufti Finance, you really can't go with the 20% down payment and, hey, show up at their door and be like, I have $250,000 and I want to buy this $1.2 million house. It's not going to really happen. They're kind of looking at people that have a much larger down payments, maybe 40, 50, 60%, or you're going to be way down the list. So what can we do? Is there certain options that are developing in terms of how can people get into home ownership? Is that a legitimate concern for young families?
Right. So, a lot of these on the back end, all these funders have to have these higher requirements because of the requirements that the investors have, etc. And having a stable income or having lower debt to a lower debt amount, right? So so there is these requirements from the back end, so that's why they have to do that. Not that they're just looking for the best clients. It's that's kind of the industry they're in right now. Yeah. So it is unfortunately the reality that Islamic finance products as they are right now is more of an upper class type of product, right? So it's not meant for your working class person, and most working class people want homes. I think it goes back to our discussion just a few minutes ago, and that is that it's just waiting until there's more of a breakthrough in the industry, where there's more access to funding, where rates will be more competitive to banks, because right now, these institutions, they're not pocketing, when they're saying, for example, that the rates are prime plus 2% or prime plus 3%, right? That 3%, it's not because they're not charging that 3% because they want to become rich and just make Muslims suffer. It's because they have investors that they have to take care of, right?
Yeah.
That provide that capital. So there's that hand which comes in between, which raises the cost. So when Islamic finance will become more accessible in the community, then the cost will be less as well. You won't run into the issues because part of the reasons why you run into the issues of the 20% is because of the CMHC requirements, etc. for the insurance and stuff. So that's why to evade that, you go straight to 20%. Whereas the big banks don't have to worry about that. So then they just have they just provide the 5%. So
it's not even 20. They say 20%, like, even like Munzil. For the big banks, you can go in with 20% and you'll get 80% mortgage. Obviously, you'll pay a lot in terms of your monthly rate. But with Munzil, like, their minimum requirement is 20%. But I think kind of an unspoken reality is that they're not really, like, you're not going to really get in there. You're just going to be put on the waiting list. You'll get kind of bumped up the list, I believe, if you have a much larger down payment. You're coming up front, you have just a small sliver remaining. And that's kind of the challenge. And that waiting list is just growing and growing, and not many people are able to access. But hopefully, like you said, there's a big breakthrough.
Right.
But I wanted to ask, kind of one of the things that are holding Muslims back from building wealth is that access to capital again. And it kind of comes into play where a lot of people, the way they build wealth is through accessing capital in banks and then leveraging that money, especially in real estate. Something like 80% plus of millionaires that are made, say, in the United States. It's a statistic, especially from there, but I think it applies generally to the West and Canada. Definitely, 80% of millionaires are made via real estate, and that means that they're just borrowing money from the bank. They're investing it in house one, house two, or multi-dwelling units, multiple doors, and they're kind of building up. And it takes a number of years, and eventually, they have a good amount of wealth that they've built. And they just kind of keep rolling that in and building wealth. And what's happening is Muslims that are not able to follow that model are completely unable to access building wealth to that level. So entrepreneurship is kind of the only way, but then they have that only 20% chance of becoming a millionaire, quote unquote. So, what do you say in terms of entrepreneurship for Muslims? Is that something that's gone ahead much further along in places like South Africa and the UK, where Muslims have been able to attain a certain level of wealth, and then gone on to that more higher level in society, and then are able to then establish larger institutions and have a more prominent presence?
I would say that's actually one of the reasons for the prosperity of Muslims in South Africa is entrepreneurship, right? So you don't really find many Muslims that make the big millions of rands in South Africa, doing so through just working 9 to 5 jobs, right? They're entrepreneurs, and they support their community, right? When I went to South Africa after Mufti Zain Baig passed away, and I was speaking to one of my friends who also teaches at a madrasa in South Africa, in Durban. So he was asking me, how's your madrasa, and how do you guys deal with your funding? And I was just mentioning the challenges that there are in Canada, and especially with funding, etc. So he found that to be a shock, and he told me his monthly salary, right? His monthly salary gets paid to him by a specific person every single month. They e-transfer him his salary, and every single scholar who teaches in that institute has like a businessman who just pays and sponsors their salaries. So they have a lot of access to wealth, and a lot of that is because of entrepreneurship, right? And I don't know if this is really the case, but I feel like in our kind of society, right, especially in Canada, a lot of our people are still live in a very colonized mentality, right? And living it safe, and doing things which are safe. So any failure that anyone ever has to go through is like a staple, and it's shown to everybody that, listen, this guy tried to do this and he failed, so don't go into business because you're also going to fail. But I think entrepreneurship is the way to go. And I think the attitude of those Muslims right now who have made it, who do have access to capital, should be in thinking how we can uplift our younger generation with the capital that they have. And the fact of the matter is that Muslims in Canada are still in a consumer phase, right? We're more concerned of how we can consume. We're not concerned on how we could uplift with our capital. So you might have had this discussion with Dr. Saf, is that that you have Muslims who have millions sitting in their banks. They could use that capital to uplift, for example, Muslim organizations, invest in those organizations which are going to help Muslims, right, to get your return, but also aid and assist Muslim community. But because the mindset is still the consumer mindset, we want to keep our capital to ourselves, right? But what's important, I think, for the future is to develop, right, to develop our society, to develop our community. I mean, in South Africa, you have Muslim-owned hospitals, right? You have Muslim-owned supermarkets. You have Muslim-owned malls. You have, it's like the society at large is moving together, whereas here, we don't have that type of mentality, right? It's all about finish a degree, get a job, invest in stocks, and if you're lucky enough and you made enough money from stocks, invest in a house, and you've made it, right? But I think what's important is we need to, empower our generation, our upcoming generation to build, to build our own schools, to build our own hospitals, to build our own, businesses, so that we can sustain ourselves and we don't need, anything from outside.
That makes sense. I think there's a mindset shift that's definitely needed. And I think that's an important point for sure. I think moving on to your madrasa, you've started a madrasa school in Montreal, and can you tell us more about how did you start that?
Right. So first, I didn't start the madrasa myself. So I meaning I was part of I'm a co-founder. So
yeah.
So one of my teachers, Maulana Jamil. So we started together, and initially we were part of a larger organization, with some other members who were also part of the founding of the institute, and very early on, because of a lack of I would say alignment on many core values, we decided to split amicably, and myself and Maulana Jamil, we started our own type of project, and really the idea actually goes back to what I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, which goes back to my studies, and that was that I wanted to study, and I wanted to go out to study, but I couldn't study outside because of my situation. But I had no options in my own city, and my city, Montreal, it's not like Fort Mac or some underdeveloped Muslim. Fort Mac is pretty developed now, but I'm saying, I don't know, some small town in random, like Stouffville, for example, right?
We're part of Greater Toronto here.
So it's a major metropolitan city. So you should have something, and actually many people have their roots. Muslims have their roots in Montreal from the 80s and beyond that. So that concern started then, right? And while I was studying, I had to drive a lot, right? I had to go from place to place. Some days, driving several kilometers, to just get my education. And at the time, my concern was that should anybody want to study, right? Should anyone want to do the Alimiya course, or they want to do the Hifz course, they shouldn't have to do what I had to do, right? So that was the idea behind it, right? And this was same sentiment that Maulana Jamil had as well, is that we should work together to develop an institute so that anybody who wanted to study should be able to study, and this institute should cater to professionals, should cater to university students, and again, going back to myself, because that's what I had done as well. I was studying while I was doing university as well. So give them that opportunity to study as well. And also, take it from there and develop it and see where it goes.
So what's your vision, for the school in moving forward?
So there's a few visions that I have, right? So one vision that I do have is, so right now we have a variety of programs that the institute offers. So we have the Alimiya program, we have the Hifz program, which is accompanied with our homeschool support program, where we provide homeschool support in a way that so the accreditation process in acquiring the school is lengthy. So it takes time to build the application to present to the government, and then once you've complete the application, it takes a year for them to approve the application. So it's a long process, and I haven't really gone into it. I haven't really gone into a deep dive to see all the requirements. So that homeschool support program is working well, alhamdulillah. But I do, as an educator, as a teacher, I do have this goal or this desire to actually establish a certified school, an educator-led school, which places education, at its core, and develop a school that would, academically be, at one of the highest levels, and at the same time, be able to provide Islamic education, right? So not just a 1-hour course that students do and taught by unqualified people, but an actual Islamic studies program which is integrated into the high school syllabus or the elementary syllabus, which would allow the person to leave the school knowing all their basics that they need to know at a good level, and also graduate with their academics at a high level as well. That's one angle of the Darul Uloom that I have a vision for. Second angle is the Islamic academic, like the Islamic sciences. So to develop an institution which is going to produce scholars that are going to serve in Quebec and beyond, and essentially develop a type of trust within the community that the same way when it comes to medical research, for example, you refer to McGill, right, or in Toronto you refer to the University of Toronto, etc. So develop that trust in the community that whenever there's any Islamic related issues, Masajid and other organizations on the ground can refer back to the Darul Uloom to get their guidance for whatever their activities are.
So, I mean, that sounds like a great idea in order to move ahead in both secular and Islamic education for students. And when they graduate, they're kind of prepared in both directions, and they can kind of use both and synergize to move ahead. So where do you see as what areas of Islamic study require more development in terms of more research? Would it be finance, business, social affairs, jurisprudential, or political, even technology? Where do you see we're lacking quite a bit? And as people graduate from Islamic institutions with a lot of education, and also possibly added on secular education as you've done, how can they move ahead and actually contribute to some of these fields?
That's a loaded question, and I think it has a lot to do with first being grounded in the Islamic equivalent of those sciences, right? So if a person, and I get this question a lot on LinkedIn, is that I want to advance my field in Islamic finance. How can I do so? And one advice I usually give them is don't just study Islamic finance as a subject like in a vacuum, right? So you'll find books, Islamic Finance 101, etc. And that's fine, right? You'll get a good exposure of the field. But what will give you deep understanding is a thorough understanding of fiqh al-buyu, right? A thorough understanding of the fiqh of transactions, which are classically mentioned, right? Because that's where you draw all your principles from, right? That's how you draw all your principles from, and that's where, like the juice of that is found in Islamic finance, but that's the core. So in I would say anything related to law or anything which is contemporary, it's important for, I think, scholars to first be well grounded in those subjects so that they can navigate through, and then after that, I think it's a question of building parallels between each, right? And that's kind of the Islamic finance industry that we have today, and why it's so developed. One person who was instrumental in that is Mufti Usmani, right? Mufti Usmani is extremely well grounded in Islamic sciences. So he was able to develop, right, most of what we have today, a lot of what we have today, based on his expertise. So, but there's a lot of things, for example, right, in terms of social. I think we're what we have developed as a community, and it's still it's a step in the right direction, but we've developed conventional or we've developed models which are similar to conventional models. So we've developed Muslim mental health centers, for example. Or we've developed Muslim schools, right? So, yes, we've put a Muslim touch to it, but how Islamic or how grounded in Islam are these institutions? And that's
exactly. Yeah.
and those things. I think those are discussions, and those are how can I word this? Those are things which require, I think, a lot of research.
So that's kind of leads me to asking about, any thoughts about Islamic think tanks and research organizations that can kind of work full time, developing bodies of knowledge in areas such as political science, could be, the Islamic stance on democracies, Islamic stances on social sciences, psychology, the understanding of, social interactions, a lot of these things that are developing and forming society today, in terms of gender identity, a lot of other social issues that affect, all of modern society. And a lot of Muslims kind of distance themselves or don't feel comfortable in a lot of ways, but we don't really have a direct answer on how to deal with these things. And we don't also have a collective, and organizations that can kind of move and publish papers, publish findings, publish research in these fields. Is that something, and then that can establish an Islamic kind of academic class that can deal with these issues at a higher level, and then so that we have our own kind of answer to a lot of the challenges that are in society, and then that can teach us how we can engage with modern society, especially with with the the elite class, the upper class, the political class in our government, and we don't really have much of a say in our own voice.
I think it's extremely important, but it goes down back to the question of funding, right? And a lot of these organizations who try to do this, right? So like for example, like we run a Dar al-Ifta, right? It's a Canadian Center of Islamic Research and Ifta. So the purpose is so that we're available to research issues when they come about and publish resolutions and papers, etc. Problem is that everybody who's involved in that has a daytime job, right? Has something else that they're doing, and it's not possible for us really to leave that without having a stable source of income for that, which is
we need endowments, with large endowments.
Exactly,
so a lot of academic institutions, they just rely on that. They don't have to even worry about making money somehow in order to keep themselves going.
So I think it's a very important, and I think we as a community, I think we need to point out or see which scholars are meant for that, right? Because not everybody is research is not everyone's cup of tea, right?
Yes.
And everyone's just cut out to do research. Not everyone's cut out to just sit in front of a computer all day and just research. So, but when you do find those people, invest in those people, right? Invest in those institutions, so that they can free themselves to, find solutions for society, right? So
that's right.
Like Mufti Zain Baig, rahmatullah alayhi, for his last 10 years of his life, he had devoted 30 years of his life, teaching, and he was also doing ifta as well. But his last 10 years of his life, he was fully devoted towards the field of research and ifta, right? So his organization in South Africa was unparalleled in the sense that their research that they were publishing, their fatwa that they were publishing, and in COVID as well. I mean, to provide the guidance to the public, it was something that no other institute in South Africa was able to really produce. So I think it's really important to have those institutions and to have the right people to free themselves to be able to do that, especially because a lot of what we're doing right now, a lot of what's happening in society is bridging, right? We have to bridge the gap, right? There's societal demands. There's as time goes on, there's just concepts that are just showing up, right? Like, I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Like AI is it's something so new, and it's every time you read up on it, and it's like, okay, well, what's the Shari hukam? What's going to be the Shari ruling on this, right? So society is moving so fast, and it's important for the right people to be in that in the field and to produce the correct resolutions so that we're prepared. I remember when we were in studying, and this was during COVID, and it was in December-ish time, and that's when the vaccines were rolling out, right? So I remember one statement my teacher mentioned. He said, and he had, South Africa, Mufti Zain Baig, he pushed you. He pushed you to levels that you never knew you could. The amount of pressure you put on you. So you put a lot of pressure on us to look up on the vaccine, and he had arranged for a panel discussion with two senior immunologists and so like top doctors in KZN. So we had these discussions with them, and you put a lot of pressure on us to kind of come to resolution on the vaccines, etc. And then I remember he mentioned something really profound. He said, it's the job of the Mufti to and the vaccines hadn't rolled out yet, right? They were going to be rolled out within a few, and it's in South Africa. So they had rolled out elsewhere, but they hadn't rolled out in South Africa yet. So this was about a month before the vaccines rolled out. So he said to us, it's important to be proactive in the field and to see, and to kind of not say predict, but to ensure that you're in the game, so that when the fatwa comes out, or when the issue comes about, the public knows how to react. He said, what's the point if you issue a fatwa 3 months after the vaccine rolled out, half the ummah's already taken the vaccine. What point is your fatwa now? Right?
Yeah, exactly.
It has no value.
So we should preempt a lot of these big societal changes. It's very important because I thought about, and a lot of people have asked about, for example, crypto. A lot of people have some money in crypto, a couple of $100, thousands of dollars. People have bought at least Bitcoin, Ethereum, and some other, a lot of other coins as well. And that whole cryptocurrency community and the whole industry is very complicated. There are some more legitimate coins, for example, Bitcoin, which is very well established, Ethereum as well. But there's a lot of newer coins that are coming out. Solana, there's a lot of other meme coins, they call it, that are just become popular because of influencers, because of social media. And a lot of people are dumping money into them, and they kind of pump up. And then, sometimes the founders of those coins will they call it rug pulling, and they'll just pull all the capital out, and everybody else's, value of their coins just tanks. So they lose money. So there's a lot of fraud involved as well, but that whole industry is very complicated. And then there's also ways of DeFi, it's called. It's decentralized finance, right? And then people can stake their coins, their cryptocurrencies, and earn money on interest, or in a way that is basically like interest. And there's a lot of other kind of new models of financing and using your cryptocurrencies and various transactions that are coming out. And most of Islamic kind of scholarship has not much of an answer, or a lot of scholars are kind of in a holding pattern. And let's see where this goes before we kind of pass judgment. But the truth be told is that they haven't spent sufficient time researching into it. But that's one of the fastest moving industries that's moving ahead. And a lot of people put their money into it already. So we don't really have a resource to go to, for cryptocurrency. Another thing is, like you mentioned, AI. AI is moving ahead, especially with, ChatGPT and a lot of equivalent kind of services out there. You can go online and ask a question, even an Islamic question, and it'll spit out a response. And presumably within, very short amount of time, we're going to have an artificial intelligence mufti, an AI that's been trained on all the books of fiqh and hadith and Quran and tafsir and, all of the Islamic books, and it has massive amounts of knowledge from all of the kind of collective knowledge that exists in academia, and then it's trained on that, and then you can just ask a question, it'll give you an answer. And now it's not checked and approved by Mufti Ibrahim Desai. It's just automatically generated. No one's really checking, and how can we develop a lot of organizations, for example, Elon Musk and a lot of other people are developing kind of an ethics and morals committee behind AI that can drive their development. But we don't really have that yet. So these are, I think, some of the areas of concern. And a lot of other examples, like there's social issues, that are affecting a lot of youth today, and a lot of other things, and they don't really have a place to go to. Mataba Institute is one kind of very tiny example of it, but we don't really have a go-to resource for a lot of these big questions that are developing in our community. So I kind of moving to social issues, I think I want to touch on that a little bit. A lot of young people are struggling with identity issues, self-doubt, especially balancing their Islamic identity, their ethnicity, their Canadian identity, and they're questioning, where do they belong? And, how have you dealt with that? Have you had to deal with some of that, as part of your position, especially in Montreal?
It's difficult, right? And I think I say this to many of my fellow ulama, and that's that we often forget how it feels, right? When we're kind of away from society for like 7-8 years, and we're studying in our safe place, and we come back, and we're so elevated with whatever knowledge we're studying, and then we come back and we can't really relate to the average kid, right? And I'll tell you one example was when I was doing a placement at a high school, at a public high school, and so the periods were 75 minutes each, and the last 2 periods there was a 15-minute gap. So Maghrib, so school ended at 4:20.
Yeah.
And Maghrib was entering at 4:28, right? And lunchtime was at 1 o'clock, so there wasn't any time to pray Asr. So the only time they could pray Asr was a 10-minute break in between 2 classes, right? So I struggle to pray my asr, right, in those 10 minutes, right? I mean, you have to wrap everything up, and you have your own classroom, so you can shut your door, close your blinds, pray your asr, and that's it. But the younger ones, right? It takes a lot of iman to move away or to pray in a corner, especially if you're in a non-Muslim school. So there's a lot of our youth face a lot of difficulty, and especially with fitting in and being part of essentially a society that's calling them towards one thing, whereas the non-fun or non-relevant people are calling them towards something completely different.
That's right.
So I think what our youth need, they don't need our lectures. They don't need our bayans. They don't need our, whatever we're going to give them. They need our support, right? They need our help. They need empowerment, right? They need to feel that they are, that they're on the right path, and that, whatever they're doing is actually not only beneficial for their dunya, but also beneficial for their akhirat as well. And I think there's a big change, alhamdulillah, as opposed to when I was growing up, in terms of youth programs and masjids and having, youth seminars and all those different things. But we're nowhere near, done, right? And we have, because we're tapping right now into those youth who want an Islamic identity, right? So they feel that vacuum, or they feel that emptiness, and they come to the masjid, or they come to these programs because they want to be part of the Muslim community. But you also have, and irtidad is so rampant right now, right? And irtidad, whether it's and by what I mean by irtidad, I mean, leaving Islam. Not only, in terms of those who blatantly leave Islam and say, we left Islam, but even silently, right? So they're just Muslims, and you ask them a few follow-up questions, and it's just a matter of asking the right follow-up questions until they'll admit that they're not Muslim anymore, right? So, so there's a lot of support which is required in schools, in communities, to kind of keep the Muslim community together and empower these youth so that they understand what Islam has given them.
So how can we what are some of the important steps we can do, I guess, as raising children? I'm a father of some young kids. I know you are as well. So is there certain things that you are focusing on at a certain earlier age, tender age, so that you're preparing the kids for when they're, teenagers, and a lot of those things start to become a lot more troublesome?
So I have a theory, and the theory is that disrespectful kids are disrespectful kids will always have disrespectful parents, and respectful kids will always have respectful parents. So of course,
what if you have one of each?
Of course, there are exceptions, right?
Yeah.
And I don't mean but I mean, what I mean to say is that to be made to feel as a teacher, where you're just a worker, or you're just this lower class person, that sentiment comes from the parent, and that child carries those sentiments, right? So I think what's extremely important, number one, in raising children, is instilling respect, right? Instilling respect in them, right? And it can be the smallest things, right? It's the smallest of things. I think getting up to meet an adult, right? These are things which are people don't do anymore, right? Not putting your feet towards an adult, right? And of course, maybe in our society now it's normal, but these small things, right, which I would say is important. So having kids who respect adults, respect authority, and aren't just roaming around doing whatever they want. So that's something which I feel is extremely important. And then after that, I feel like children should understand that their parents are there to be that net for them. So they're given the ability to pursue what they want to, right? To go into whatever their interests are, and their parents are there to guide them and save them when they're essentially failing at whatever they're doing, and help them get back up. And not just what's the worst thing that could happen, I think, for a child, is to feel like they're doing something that they want, and they're scared to fail, not because, of any rational reason, but they're scared to fail because they know that if they fail, the first person that's going to go after them is their parents, right? And I think that's something that needs to be eliminated. Kids need to feel safe that they're going to follow what they want, and that their parents are going to be there to support them along the way. And if they fail, it's not the end of the world, right? People fail. People don't do well. People open businesses and they shut down. It's not the end of the world, right? If you open a business and you're $30,000 in debt or $40,000 in debt, it's not the end of the world, right? You can work, you can rebuild, you can come out of those stages and go on. But parents need to develop that. I think that bond with their kids, where kids feel that my dad, my mom has my back.
So I think that makes a lot of sense. But I think in terms of, wrapping up, one final question I think that can help a lot of people, in today's society is the aspect of marriages and maintaining happy, stable, marriages that can last, all the way throughout to their, old age and to death do us part. A lot of people today are, getting married or getting together, and the marriage is not able to last. Even in the Muslim community, divorce rates are up, a lot of separations are up, and people have spent maybe many years together, then they're still getting divorced. And a lot of times, a lot of younger couples they get married, and within a few years they're getting divorced. Is that an issue that you see happening, and do you deal with any couples issues? Have you had any exposure to that? And what are some maybe remedies that you could share?
So I got married fairly young, younger than most people, and many of my friends actually got married at the same time, and unfortunately, those marriages aren't either are not stable or they're no longer married anymore.
Yeah,
and I think a lot of it has to do with, and actually, so when I wanted to get married, I wanted to get married like 2 years before I actually started looking to get married. And one of the reasons why I stopped looking for marriage at that time was because, one of my teachers put me in my place and said, you're not, kind of made me understand that I wasn't ready for marriage. And I think it's very subjective. It's very relative as well, that who is actually ready to get married. But I would say marriage is something that, or one thing that people that are getting married need to understand is that it's a commitment, right? And it's something, it's part of you as a role, right? So the same way you're CEO, you're an senior software engineer, or you're whatever you are, you're a husband as well, right? And the same way you put work into your career, you put work into being anything that you want to be, you have to put work into being a husband as well, right? And I think a lot of long-term marriages that have gone for long suffer from that, right? So a husband and wife will try for 7 to 8 years, and once they get that 8-9 years, they feel okay, we've made it, and then they'll stop trying, and they'll stop doing things for each other, and then it comes to the point where those marriages fall, right? So one particular issue, and this is aimed at the youth, is that just because you feel the need to get married physically, it doesn't mean you need to get married, right? There's other ways of saving yourself from society, right? You don't need to just get married to anybody and just fulfill your physical desires, and that's it, right? You could fast, you could do different things, and then you could get married once you're ready to get married, right? Right? You have to be physically and mentally prepared to take care of another person, right? Deal with them, deal with their issues, deal with whatever they have, and then have the ability to financially provide for them. Whereas, and because I deal with students, and then students come to me all the time and say, Mufti Zain, we want to get married. So the question I ask them is, so have you tried fasting? And they'll say no. So I said, so you don't have the himmat, you don't have the courage to fast for Sawm Dawood, for example, or even the Sunnah fast, and you think you'll just get this courage to get married, and that's it, right? So a lot of people as well, they feel like marriage is this secret pill that they'll swallow and everything is gonna come into place, and so they're not they don't have a proper job, they don't going to school, they're not going to the masjid, but you know what? They're gonna get married, and all of a sudden everything's gonna come into place, right? Now, so you have to be prepared before you get married, so that your marriage can elevate you. And honestly, I feel like if a person is actually devoted in whatever they're doing, and you know they're genuinely ready, you know, to support a family, to support, you know, the people around them. And actually getting married is not just supporting your one spouse, right? It's fostering relationships, right? You have a relationship with your in-laws, you have a relationship with your wife's greater family, you have a relationship with your wife and your family, and you know, you have kids, and it becomes more and more complicated. So that maturity to deal with all these things, I think if a person gets married young and actually has this in mind, is ready to get married, and actually chooses the right spouse who's willing to support them in their journey, and they're both willing to support each other, then I think it's a cause of success. And I feel like, you know, I felt that one of the reasons why I was able to stay focused throughout the last 10, 11 years was because I was married, and I had that responsibility, and I had somebody to support me in my vision.
That sounds great. Maulana Zain, thank you so much for your time. It's been great speaking with you, and hope to inshallah do it with you again sometime soon. I mean, Jazakallah khairan for having me. And that's been it. Thank you, Maulana Zain, for coming on the show. For you guys out there, please like, subscribe, and share. And if you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them below, and we'll catch you on the next one.